Hello everyone. I hope you're having a better than average day. A few weeks back, my friend told me about a game jam I might be interested in. Because they are proficient at coding and I like to make art, we decided that they would develop the game and I would draw the assets. Check out their socials below. We participated in 2 game jams. The first was the Nokia 3310 jam, where the goal is to make an old school Nokia compatible game within the associated restrictions. We were only allowed 2 colors in a 48 by 84 pixel format with monophonic sound. Additionally, the number of controls was limited to 12. These limitations meant designing the game was going to be difficult, but we were up for the challenge. On my side of the development, there were 2 major constraints to look out for: color and canvas size. I knew all the art had to be 1-bit in those 2 green colors. As for the subject of the game, we decided to do a take on the original Snake game from that style of Nokia. However, instead of being the snake that eats apples, you are the apple being chased by a snake. To change it up a bit, we turned it into a platformer. So now we had the basic concept, we began working on it. This is the original Snake asset my friend drew as a placeholder, and this is the version I replaced it with. At the time, I didn't realize how bad my drawing was until I looked at it later. My snake looked like a weird dinosaur and alligator hybrid. So this time, I used reference photos to observe what an actual snake looks like. And I have to say, I was much happier with the result. I began working on some chomping animations, as well as some idle, still maintaining within the jam's restrictions. Due to the tiny canvas size, drawing the protagonist was a challenge. We needed enough detail to be recognizable as an apple, but not take up the entire screen. Once I had an okay asset, I began creating some animations such as running, jumping, and idle. Taking inspiration from the original title screen, I decided the concept of our game would be clearer if I made a title of our own. So, I began drawing a similar snake with an apple in the foreground. I implemented some text too, mimicking the style of the original. Because we had 7 days to make the game and I'd already made most of the necessary assets, I began working on some death screens, a unique one for each way you can die in the game. I ended up making 4 death screens, however only 3 were used in the final version. The first one was Death by Fruit Kebab, which displays when you get impaled by a spike and eaten by the snake. I worked on Death by Chomp next, which happens when you simply get eaten by the enemy. Finally, Death by Splat is shown when you fall off a platform. The one animation that wasn't used was Death by Timeout. This was for a feature that didn't get added, where the player would die if they ran out of time. And that's it. That was my experience creating assets for the Nokia 3310 jam. Of course, there are some areas of our game that could be improved, such as the glitch where you fall through platforms 1 pixel above. But overall, I feel like we achieved a charming little pocket game that can be picked up by anyone. If you do want to check the game out, I'll have it linked in the description. The next game was for the 7-day roguelike challenge. The concept of our game was going to be a roguelite, where you progress through a series of restaurants trying to maintain your reputation. For this game, we decided on a vector art style instead of our usual pixel art. Because the content of the game revolved around cutting up seafood and serving it, I started by coming up with some ideas. By experimenting with concepts, I now had a guide for both the art style and color palette. Getting my friend's approval, I began designing some of the necessary assets. I drew the weapons first, trying to maintain consistency. These were relatively easy to make, although there were quite a lot of them. You can see me in the time-lapse drawing some kitchen tiles. These are going to be an additional element of the game where you move around within the restaurants. However, they were not used in the final game due to design changes. Either way, it was still interesting to make a time-lapse in vector shapes. Usually I create time-lapse in pixel art, so this was a nice change. The fish would need 4 stages: 1 uncut version, 1 half-cut, 1 prepared, and 1 expired or overcut. I made some other assets such as a title page, a restaurant tile set, and some logos. Doing vector art for a game provided a nice change from regular pixel art. I definitely learned a lot and used some of my pixel art knowledge to help me. Overall, I wasn't too happy with the final drawings, mainly because I limited myself to a strange color palette in the hopes of consistency. Fishy business is very complicated and there are lots of rules to learn, but once you play it for a while, it starts to become enjoyable. There are various items and weapons to collect, and it's fun to try and come up with the optimum toolset. These games are linked in the description if you want to try them out. And they won't be the last game jams I go in, as I have plans for more in the future. Thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next video.